All right, let's begin. We're conducting an after-action analysis of the Elorrio-Elgueta operation, which took place in late April of 1937. The objective here is to really dig into how nationalist forces managed to envelop a heavily fortified front, and, more importantly, what lessons we can draw from that for maneuver warfare.
Here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll start with the tactical situation and the terrain itself. Then, we'll look at the plan and the forces involved. From there, we'll analyze the failure of the frontal assaults at Inchortas, followed by the success of the southern envelopment, and finally, we'll wrap up with the resulting collapse and the operational consequences.
Okay, let's set the stage. Our analysis starts by establishing the tactical picture as it stood on the 15th of April, 1937. This is right after the initial breach of the enemy's main defensive line.
So, with that initial front broken, nationalist forces under General Solchaga pushed up and consolidated their positions right along the Cantabrian watershed. This new front line you see here, this became the springboard for the next phase, an operation designed to completely unhinge the enemy's entire defensive system.
You know, you can't understand this operation without understanding the ground it was fought on. The terrain here was a huge factor. It's rugged, it's broken country, and that formidable ridgeline from Peña Udala to Tres Inchortas acts as a natural fortress. Now, the man-made fortifications on the Inchortas weren't necessarily massive, but the sheer strength of the ground itself turned it into an incredibly powerful strongpoint. It heavily favored the defender, making any kind of direct assault a really daunting prospect.
So that's the problem. You're facing this formidable defensive terrain. How do you solve it? Let's take a look at the concept of operations and see how the Nationalists planned to tackle this tactical puzzle.
The plan, issued by General Solchaga on April 10th, was basically a 1-2 punch. The main effort, the real killer blow, was an enveloping maneuver by the 1st Brigade. Their job was to swing south and advance on Elorrio. At the same time, a supporting effort, a frontal rupture by the 4th Brigade, was tasked with fixing the enemy in place right on that Campanzar-Elgueta line. Now, to help blast a path through that front, Command assembled a massive concentration of firepower. We're talking 110 artillery pieces, and that's separate from the brigade's organic assets. The goal for this immense barrage was pretty straightforward, just pound a path for the frontal attack.
And what's really interesting here is just how meticulously they organized this fire support. It wasn't just a random barrage. It was divided into 3 distinct groups: a legionary group, a field group, and a heavy position group. This setup allowed for a really detailed fire plan, coordinated with aviation, that had specified periods for correction and effect. The whole thing was designed to systematically neutralize enemy defenses before the infantry even moved.
Okay, so that's the plan. Let's see how it played out in execution, starting with that supporting effort, the frontal assault. After a few delays because of bad weather, the operation finally kicked off on April 20th. The first attempt by the 4th Brigade to rupture the front at the Inchortas position was a failure. Despite all that heavy preparation, the attacking forces ran into determined, well-organized resistance and were ultimately thrown back.
This map gives us a closer look at what they were trying to do, a 3-pronged attack on the strongpoint. On paper, the maneuver makes sense, a central force to fix the enemy with 2 other elements hitting the flanks. But the plan completely fell apart during its execution, mainly due to critical issues with timing and coordination.
And we know exactly why, thanks to the 4th Brigade's own operations diary. There was a severe breakdown in coordination between the artillery and the infantry. The artillery lifted its fire prematurely. This left the infantry to advance without any fire support for a critical 20-minute window, which was more than enough time for the defenders to get back into their positions and engage the assault force. That failure came at a very high price. The 4th Brigade took 327 casualties in total, including 45 killed in action. It's a stark reminder of just how costly a frontal assault against a prepared defense can be, especially when your combined arms coordination falls apart.
So they regrouped for 2 days and then made another attempt on the 23rd of April. This assault also failed. The defenders had used that time to reinforce their positions, especially along a key piece of terrain called the Camino de los Toldos, which was now bristling with automatic weapons that completely neutralized the advance.
But while that costly frontal assault was stalled, the real story, the decisive action, the main effort, was unfolding successfully on the southern flank.
Between the 21st and the 23rd, the 1st and 2nd Brigades were making steady progress. They secured key terrain, including Udala Peak,
outflanking the main defensive line and threatening the rear of the Inchortas position. See, this is where those costly frontal attacks paid off. They did their job. They fixed the defenders' attention and reserves completely on the front.
And this progress led to the decisive moment on the afternoon of the 23rd. Artillery with the flanking force was able to set up and begin firing de revés from the rear onto the Inchorta's fortifications. For a defender in a static position, that's the ultimate signal that things have gone very, very wrong. The position had been operationally turned. Then, on April 24th, the 1st Brigade's swift advance captured Elorrio, and that single action completely enveloped the main defensive line. It cut off the defenders' supply and their escape routes. All of a sudden, their heroic tactical defensive Inchortas became operationally irrelevant. They either had to pull back immediately or be trapped.
With this successful envelopment, the enemy's defensive line didn't just bend, it suffered an immediate and catastrophic collapse, and that opened the door wide for exploitation.
So on the 25th of April, the 4th Brigade finally occupied the Inchorta's positions without firing a shot. From there, both units began a rapid exploitation of the success. With the enemy front completely disintegrated, they had a clear opportunity to advance on Durango and envelop the entire Eibar sector.
And we don't have to guess about the effect on the other side. This was captured from a command post document belonging to Commander Amalibia. He confirms the devastating impact, noting that while the frontal attacks were heroically repulsed, quote, "The enveloping maneuver on Elorrio cost us the loss of 600 prisoners. On the 23rd, a great rout occurred." That phrase, "a great rout," tells you everything about the psychological collapse that maneuver caused.
This final map really shows the strategic result. This wasn't just a local victory, it was a complete shattering of the enemy's main defensive line. You can see Nationalist forces are now at the very gates of Durango, and the opposing command had no choice but to order a desperate retreat to a new line much, much further back.
So let's boil this down to the key lessons. First, frontal assaults against prepared defenses are exceptionally costly and, as we saw, often ineffective. Second, even the most detailed fire plan is worthless without precise coordination on the ground. But third, and most importantly, a well-executed enveloping maneuver can make even the strongest tactical positions operationally irrelevant. The defense of the Inchortos was tactically sound, you can't deny that, but in the end, it was operationally futile.
This operation, therefore, leaves us with a fundamental doctrinal question to consider. When you're faced with breaking a fortified line, which is the truly decisive principle? Firepower or maneuver? This concludes our analysis.